The house where my grandfather lived had always felt like the safest place in the world to me. Even now, whenever I closed my eyes, I could still picture the warm afternoon sunlight spilling through his old kitchen window, the smell of fresh tea, and the gentle sound of his laugh filling the room. My grandfather wasn't just family to me, he was my protector, my teacher, and my best friend. When I was a child, he was the one who taught me how to ride a bicycle on the quiet street outside his house. When I fell and scraped my knees, he would kneel beside me and say in his calm, steady voice, "Pain doesn't mean you stop. It means you learn how to stand up again." He had always believed in me, even when no one else did, but somewhere along the way, things changed. My parents and my grandfather had always had a complicated relationship. They rarely agreed on anything: money, decisions, even how the family should spend holidays. As I got older, the tension between them became harder to ignore. Still, my grandfather and I stayed close. We spoke on the phone almost every week. Sometimes the conversations lasted hours. He would tell stories about his younger days, about the mistakes he had made, and about the lessons he hoped I would never have to learn the hard way. Family is supposed to protect each other. He once told me, "Never forget that." I never imagined that one day my own parents would become the reason I couldn't reach him. It started slowly. One afternoon, I tried to call him, but the phone rang and rang until it went to voicemail. I figured he was napping or out with friends from the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual, but when I tried again the next day, my mother answered his phone instead. "Grandpa's resting," she said quickly. "He's not feeling well." Her voice sounded strange, almost defensive. I didn't think much of it at first. My grandfather was getting older, and small health problems weren't new. But the days kept passing. Every time I tried to call, someone else answered, usually my mother or my father. And every time they had the same excuse: "He's too tired to talk, he's sleeping, he's not up for visitors." At first I believed them. Then weeks went by. Something in my chest began to feel heavy. A quiet sense of worry started growing every time my calls were ignored or cut short. Finally, one evening, I drove to his house without telling anyone. I needed to see him for myself, but when I pulled into the driveway, my parents' car was already there. Before I could even reach the front door, my father stepped outside and closed it behind him. "You shouldn't be here," he said coldly. I stared at him, confused. "I just want to see Grandpa. He's very sick." My father replied, "He doesn't need stress right now." "Stress," I repeated. How would seeing me stress him out? My father's expression hardened. "Because he knows you don't care enough to visit him." The words hit me like a slap. "What are you talking about? I've been trying to call him for weeks." My mother suddenly appeared behind my father, crossing her arms. "You only care now," she said quietly. "He asked about you, and we told him the truth, that you're busy with your own life." My stomach twisted. "That's not true," I said. "Please just let me talk to him." But my father shook his head. "He doesn't want to see you anymore." Those words echoed in my mind the entire drive home. Deep down, something felt terribly wrong. My grandfather would never say that. Not after everything we had shared. But no matter how many times I called after that night, the answer never changed. Either no one picked up, or my parents told me the same thing again. "He's too tired. He doesn't want visitors." He said not to bother him. Weeks later, I learned the truth in the worst possible way. My grandfather wasn't just sick, he was dying. And while I sat alone wondering why he had suddenly turned away from me, my parents were sitting beside his hospital bed, telling him that I didn't care enough to come see him. The lie was slowly breaking his heart, and I didn't even know it. The day I learned my grandfather had died felt unreal. The phone call came early in the morning. My mother's voice was strangely calm, almost casual. "Your grandfather passed away last night," she said. For a moment I couldn't speak. The words didn't feel real, like they were meant for someone else. "What?" I whispered. "He'd been sick for a while," she continued. "It was peaceful, peaceful." The word echoed painfully in my head. I gripped the phone tighter. Why didn't anyone tell me it was that serious? There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You knew he was sick," she replied flatly, "and you didn't come." The accusation hit me like a punch to the chest. "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "You told me he didn't want to see me." Another long silence followed. "Well," my mother finally said, "it's too late now." The call ended before I could say anything else. For hours I sat there in stunned silence, replaying every conversation I had had with my parents over the past few weeks. Every excuse, every blocked visit, every unanswered call. Something didn't add up. I knew my grandfather. No matter how sick he was, he would never refuse to see me. By the afternoon, the weight of regret had become unbearable. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the hospital, where he had spent his final days. I told myself I just needed to see the place where he had been. Maybe speak to someone who had cared for him. Maybe somehow feel closer to him. The hospital lobby smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. People moved quietly through the halls, their faces tired and worried. At the reception desk, I asked about my grandfather. The woman looked at her computer and then pointed me toward the oncology wing. "Room 312, she said gently. My chest tightened as I walked down the long hallway. The room number felt like a countdown I couldn't stop. The door was open. Inside, the bed was already empty. The sheets had been replaced, the equipment cleaned, as if my grandfather's final days had been erased from the room. I stood there frozen, staring at the space where he had taken his last breaths. A soft voice behind me broke the silence. "You must be his grandchild." I turned around. A woman in blue scrubs stood in the doorway. She looked to be in her late 30s, with tired eyes but a kind expression. "Yes," I said quietly, "I'm his grandson." She studied my face carefully. "You're Alex, right?" My heart skipped. "Yes." The nurse sighed softly and stepped inside the room, closing the door behind her. "I was hoping you would come," she said. Something in her voice made my stomach twist with unease. "You knew my grandfather?" I asked. "I was his primary nurse for the past month." Her eyes grew sad. "He talked about you every day." The words hit me hard. Then why? My voice cracked. Why did he tell my parents he didn't want to see me? The nurse's expression changed instantly. Confusion crossed her face. "He didn't say that." I blinked. "What?" "He asked for you constantly," she said. "Almost every day." The room suddenly felt colder. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My parents told me he said he didn't want me here." The nurse shook her head slowly. "That's not what happened." My pulse started racing. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to say more. Then she walked over to a small cabinet beside the empty bed and opened it. From inside, she pulled out a phone. "It's his," she said softly. I stared at it, confused. "He started recording messages a few weeks ago," she explained. "Videos mostly." My throat tightened. "Messages for who?" The nurse looked directly at me. "For you." My hands trembled slightly as she placed the phone in them. "He was afraid you wouldn't make it in time," she said quietly. A heavy silence filled the room. Then she added the words that would change everything. "But there's something else you should know." I looked up at her. Tears filled her eyes. "Your grandfather spent his final days believing you didn't want to see him." My heart shattered in that moment, because the only people who could have told him that were the two people I trusted most in the world. My parents. My hands trembled as I stared at the phone the nurse had just placed in them. It was my grandfather's old phone, the same one he used to call me every Sunday evening. I recognized the worn leather case immediately. There was even a small scratch near the corner, where he had dropped it once while laughing at one of my terrible jokes. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to unlock it. The nurse stood quietly beside me, giving me space. "He started recording them about 3 weeks ago," she said softly, "sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep." My throat tightened. "Did he say why?" She nodded slowly. "He said he was afraid he might run out of time." Those words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I swallowed hard and looked down at the screen. The nurse had already opened the gallery. A long row of videos filled the display, each one labeled with a different date. There were more than 20 chances he had tried to reach me, 20 moments I didn't even know existed. My finger hovered over the first video before I finally pressed play. The screen flickered to life. There he was, My grandfather sat in the hospital bed, wearing a pale blue gown. The room behind him looked dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. He looked thinner than I remembered, frailer, but his eyes were the same warm ones that had always made me feel safe. "Hey there," he said gently, adjusting the phone. For a moment he smiled, the kind of soft smile he used whenever he saw me walk through his door. "I'm not sure if you'll ever see this," he continued quietly, but I figured it was worth trying. I felt my chest tighten as his voice filled the silent hospital room around me. "I asked your parents to call you today," he said. "They told me you're busy these days." He chuckled weakly. "That's all right, life gets busy, I understand." My eyes began to burn. "You always had big dreams," he continued. "I'm proud of that." The video ended. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until I inhaled sharply. The nurse placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "There are more," she said softly. I nodded and pressed the next video. This time my grandfather looked more tired. His voice was quieter too. "Hi again," he said. "Still haven't heard from you. Your parents say you've got a lot going on." He paused, glancing down for a moment. "I hope you know I'm not upset," he added quickly. "I just miss you, that's all." His smile tried to return, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The video ended. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. I clicked another, and another. With every recording, he looked weaker. Some nights his voice shook with exhaustion. Other nights he forced cheerful stories, like he used to do when I was younger and scared. But the pain in his eyes slowly grew. In one video, he sighed deeply before speaking. "I keep asking the nurses if maybe you called while I was asleep," he admitted quietly. He laughed softly at himself. "They probably think I'm a stubborn old man." My chest ached. Then came the video recorded only 2 days before he died. He looked incredibly fragile now. His breathing was slow, but his eyes were filled with something different. "Concern Alex," he said gently. Hearing my name spoken in his voice shattered something inside me. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he continued, "about the things your parents have been telling me." He paused, looking straight into the camera. "And something doesn't feel right." My heart skipped. "You've never been the kind of person who disappears," he said softly. "Not from me." He leaned back against the pillow, exhaustion washing over his face. "So if you are watching this," he whispered, "I want you to know something." His voice grew firmer, despite his weakness. I never believed them completely. Tears streamed down my face. "I know you," he said, "better than anyone." He coughed lightly before continuing. "And just in case I'm right, I made a few changes." My breath caught. "There are things your parents don't know about yet," he added quietly. Then he smiled faintly. "Sometimes the truth just needs a little help finding its way out." The video ended. I sat there frozen, staring at the dark screen. Slowly, I looked up at the nurse. "What did he mean, changes?" She hesitated for a moment. Then she said something that made my heart start pounding. "Your grandfather asked a lawyer to visit him here." A cold realization spread through me. He knew something was wrong, she continued, and before he died, he made sure the truth wouldn't stay buried. For several minutes after the final video ended, I couldn't speak. The hospital room felt heavy with silence, like the walls themselves had heard everything my grandfather had said. My hands were still wrapped around his phone, my fingers gripping it as if it were the last piece of him left in the world. The nurse watched me carefully. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I wish you had been here with him." Tears burned behind my eyes, but something else was rising too. Anger, not the loud kind that explodes in a moment, the quiet kind that grows slowly, steadily, until it becomes impossible to ignore. "My parents told him I didn't care," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The nurse nodded sadly. "They told him many times," she replied, "every time he asked about you." Each word felt like another crack in my chest. I looked back at the phone screen. My grandfather's last smile was still frozen in my memory. He hadn't believed them. Even in his final days, he trusted me, and somehow he had planned for this. "You said a lawyer visited him," I said, lifting my head. "Yes," the nurse answered. "A few days before he passed." My heart began to beat faster. "What happened?" He asked me to witness some documents, she explained. And he recorded a final message after the lawyer left. She pointed at the phone in my hand. It should be the last video. My thumb hovered over the final file. The date was the night before he died. I pressed play. The video opened with my grandfather sitting slightly straighter than before, as if he had gathered the last of his strength. His face looked pale, but his eyes were determined. "Hello again," he said quietly. He took a slow breath before continuing. "If you're seeing this, it means I was right." My chest tightened. Something wasn't adding up. He said, "Your parents kept telling me you didn't want to visit, that you were too busy, that you didn't ask about me." He shook his head slightly. "But I know you better than that." Tears rolled down my cheeks as his voice filled the room. "So today I had my lawyer come here." He paused to cough, pressing a hand against his chest before continuing. "I made some changes to my will." My breath caught in my throat. "Everything I own will now go to you." The words hit me like a shockwave, not because of the money, but because I knew exactly what my parents had been expecting. My grandfather continued speaking, and I left instructions that these videos be shared with the family if necessary. His eyes softened slightly. "I'm not doing this out of anger," he said gently. "I'm doing it because the truth matters." The video ended with one final sentence. "And you deserve to know what really happened." The screen went dark. I sat there in stunned silence. The nurse crossed her arms gently. "He wanted you protected," she said. For the first time since hearing the truth, a small sense of clarity settled inside me. My grandfather hadn't just left me memories. He had left me the truth and the power to reveal it. A week later, the entire family gathered at my grandfather's house for the reading of the will. My parents sat confidently at the dining table, whispering to relatives with smug smiles on their faces. They believed everything had gone exactly as they planned. When the lawyer began reading the document, my mother's smile slowly faded. My father's face turned pale. Every asset, every property, every account, all of it had been left to me. Gasps filled the room. "What?" My father snapped, standing up suddenly. "That's impossible." The lawyer calmly placed a small speaker on the table. "There is also a recorded statement," he said. Then he pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the room. The same gentle voice that had raised me, the same voice that had trusted me until the very end. As the videos played, the room fell completely silent. Every lie my parents had told, every manipulation, every cruel word they had spoken, all of it was exposed. When the recordings ended, no one spoke. My parents sat frozen, their faces drained of color. In a single moment, they had lost everything. Their inheritance, their reputation, their control over the story, but the real victory wasn't money. It was the truth, because even though my grandfather had died believing a terrible lie in the end, his voice was the one everyone heard.